Hello, my name is Nathaniel Alvarado, and I will be going over assignment 3 for distributed systems, the chat application. Diving right into it, we have the chat server to start out with. Um, First off, I create a server socket, a thread, and then a hash map. And this will be used to keep track of the clients that connect to the server. Moving along, we now have the main. This just gets the port number that is specified by the user when they set up the server. And then from there, I then call the chat server constructor and create a new instance of it and pass it the port number. And then I call on that server to then handle clients. And then afterwards, when all the threads are done and it closes out, to then finally close it. Jumping from here to the actual constructor of chat server, it of course takes the port number, and then what happens is we then try to get the current instance of the server socket, and then pass the port number. We then get the socket list, and then we make a new instance of a hash map. And then we then start a new thread, and then we just have a fixed thread pool with 5 threads in it. And then, of course, handle for any exceptions that could go wrong, and then print them out if they are to occur. Next is then the client handler. So from here, after all this is set up, now the server can actually handle when clients are trying to connect to it. So this will just continuously go out and listen for them. So that's why there's the while true here. So no matter what, as long as this thing is running, it'll always be listening. It'll first off accept the client. From there, it'll then get the output data using this print writer method. It's a built-in library. It's pretty cool. But from what that's going to do is it's going to get the output stream that was sent to it from the client, and then it'll then put the client's socket and then the output data into the socket list. We don't really care as much about the output data in this list. We care entirely about what the socket is. So then when we're done, it can then be taken out. This is then the thread that is started. It then calls on the message handler and then passes the client socket to it. And then, of course, some more exceptions down here. So then into the message handler, it then takes the socket that was passed through from up here, and then this is the thread that just keeps endlessly looping, which allows the clients to have the message be sent to the rest of them accordingly. There's just 2 string variables that are made right here, one that's client messages and one that's client name, and then this is just a buffer reader to just keep inputting the data that it gets. So then we have here, while there is still, or we set the client message is equal to each new line that is read, and as long as it's not null, it can then be assumed that the first thing that's punched in to the command line is the client's name. So that's why, as long as this is null, which is only the first time, it'll just set the client name to whatever the person enters in first. So then if that's not the case, then this is where we go through the socket list, and then we iterate through every single socket in that list. And so every single one excluding its own. So if it's not the current one, it'll then send the message to every other client that is connected to it, and then it'll then just print it out with the client name, and then it's just for formatting purposes. Then after this is done, if you hit Control D, because I'm on a Mac, it'll then remove it from the socket list, and so then it will no longer do that. And then after all this is done, then it'll just go all the way back up here to the close, and then it'll shut it down. Moving over to the client, we have a client socket, a scanner, a print writer, another scanner for line input, and then another string for the client messages. In the main, we again want to go ahead and get the port number, which is specified by the user. We then want to make a new instance of our chat client constructor, we can call it client, and pass the port number, and then we're going to want to start it. So diving into this one, into the chat client, what we do then is we go through this whole list, and then we basically are just setting everything up right here. We want to actually create the client socket, pass it. It's going to always be localhost, and then whatever the port number was that was specified. We then are going to want the input scanner, so it's going to scan through what gets typed in, and then that's going to then use a input stream reader for everything that's being punched in. We then use the print writer, and then we pass it the client socket, and then we want to get the output stream. So that's writing it over to the server. So that's how it's actually being sent. So it knows, oh, okay, this is what the data is that we have to play with. Cool. And then this last one is more line input. So it's another scanner, but this one, instead of just reading it in, it's then using an input stream reader, and then this also is being passed a client socket, and that's getting the input stream. So moving on to then the client start, it'll then execute, or it'll then create a fixed thread pool of 5, and then it'll then start these 2 threads, the receive message thread and then the send message thread. So send message, it just, while the input scanner has stuff in it, it will then go to the next line, and it'll keep reading it in, and then it'll keep sending it over. So it'll jump from this line right here, next line, to down here to output stream, and then the print line client message. So it'll keep sending over the client message to the server to then relay it to the other clients, and then if it's ever nothing, then it'll just break, and then afterwards it can close here, which is just written down here, which just shuts down the client socket, the output, and then it will just do a built-in close, and then we'll do a system exit just to be sure that everything's done. Moving into the receive message, while the line input has another line, we then continue to read that in, and then if that's the case, then we do a system out, and then we just print the client message if that's the case, because when we receive it, all we want to do is, oh, okay, we got this, okay, print it out. So instead of relaying it to the server here, this is getting it, because this is being read in from the server, sending it over, and then it just prints it. Simple as that. And then afterwards, it just does a thread shutdown. Everything's done. Everything's good to go. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.